Hello and welcome to Talking Bottom. I'm Paul Tanter.
I'm Ange Johnson.
And I'm Matt Brooks.
And we are thrilled to have a very special guest with us this week. He's a director and producer whose names will be very familiar to fans of British comedy, having worked on, amongst other things, The Young Ones, Filthy Rich and Catflap, Canned Carrot, The Full Wax, The Detectives, Lenny Henry in Pieces, Absolutely Fabulous, The Vicar of Dibley, My Family, French and Saunders, Kevin and Perry Go Large, 40 episodes of Red Dwarf, and, of course, Series 1 and 2 of Bottom, both directing and producing the show. Ed Bye, welcome and thank you for joining us. It's a privilege to have you talking Bottom with us.
Thank you very much for having me. That's a great introduction. Somebody write that down.
Oh, you have written it down.
I was scouring your CV, and it's a very extensive CV, I must say.
I know, yeah, it's because I'm so old.
How old are you?
I can't discuss that. Just a little bit over 60. I've got an Oyster card, but I can travel free on the Underground. I'm not prepared to say anything than that.
It's a fantastic back catalogue that you have, Ed. And we'd like to start by asking you a bit about your journey to producing and directing such iconic BBC shows. Why did you first pursue production as a career?
I think it was, I was doing my A-levels at Kingston College of Further Education. I was sitting in a refectory, which is a sort of posh word for a place where you can sit and nothing else happens. And I was sitting with a friend of mine who was a part-time drug dealer. And he said to me, and you know the drug dealers have that kind of nasal twang. So he sort of went, "Man, what is it you want to do?" And I said, "Well, go to the pub." And he went, "No, mate, well, further on, you know, in life." And I thought, I don't know. I had no idea. And he said, "Well, what do you like doing, man?" And so I said, "Well, I like going to the cinema and watching telly at home." And he went, "Well, why don't you work in that?" And this sort of light bulb went off over my head. I thought, yeah, working the thing that you like doing most, which is, you know, watching movies and watching TV. Yeah, so I sort of pursued that. And I kind of had a feeling that it was something I really wanted to do. So I then went to a place called Ravensbourne College of Further Education in Bromley, did a TV production course there. And then that's what really spurred me on, you know. And then I turned up to the BBC. I said, "Give me a job." And they went, "No." And so I worked in the theatre. You had to do that in those days. You had to work in the theatre. So I worked in the theatre for a couple of years, went back to the BBC. I said, "Give us a job." They went, "No." And then I met someone who was a production manager at the BBC, and she was married to the head of studio management at the BBC. And I got to know her and got her to say to her husband, "Give Ed Bye a job or I'll make your divorce very difficult." So he reluctantly gave me a floor assistant's job on holiday relief, which means that you're only unemployed for about 3 months. And I think the pay was about £7.
Wow.
What, an hour?
No, a week.
Gosh. So you got your in with the...
Yeah, I got my in, and then once I was in, it was as fun as I thought it would be.
Okay. And was it comedy shows that you wanted to work on at the BBC, or did that happen by sort of happy circumstance?
That sort of happened by happen chance. What I did want to do is I wanted to work on the shows that I like watching. So I thought, I want to work on Top of the Pops so that I can say to everybody, I've worked on Top of the Pops, which was massive in those days.
Yeah.
And also, there were certain shows on around that time that were just unbelievably good, that were comedy shows like Fawlty Towers and stuff. It's really who you got to work with. So I started to work with a guy called Paul Jackson. I did various things with him, you know, as you're working your way up, like the Two Ronnies, and he did a pilot called Boom Boom Out Go the Lights. And while we were working on the Two Ronnies, he handed me the script and said, "What do you think of this?" And it was The Young Ones. So I worked with him on that, but not as a director, you know, sort of as a lower person. Yeah, and it developed from there, really.
Fantastic.
And so that swung me into comedy. With him as a producer, I did things like Girls on Top, and of course Red Dwarf, and then Bottom emerged. Bottom emerged.
Gaping.
So the gaping bottom emerged.
Yes.
So was working on The Young Ones the first time that you met Rik and Ade?
No, because this pilot called Boom Boom Out Go the Lights,
that.
it was a strange little show, and these new alternative comedians were showcasing their stuff. So that's the first time I think I met Rik.
So was that sort of sketch based, or was it? Was there?
Yeah, it was sort of character sketches. Yeah,
Right.
so he would come on and play Rik the poet, and
Sure.
Ade was playing the piano. I think with Rik as well. They were doing double act. Peter Richardson,
Okay.
Alexi Sale, they were all on it. A lot of them just got their equity cards on that show.
Really?
So they'd never been on telly before. Yes, I think that's the first time I met him.
Because we couldn't get a straight answer from the internet, but what it looked like from your IMDb thing is your first directing credit is on an episode of The Young Ones. Is that, did you do some of Summer Holiday, the last episode, or?
No, I didn't. In fairness, I didn't direct. That's interesting. It's come up before. I never really directed anything in The Young Ones. They were either directed by Jeff Posner or Paul Jackson. I might have done the odd shot in a film, but in the filmed inserts. But certainly, no, I didn't really direct any of it. But what did happen is after the end of the second series, when I was a production manager, and in those days, a production manager was the production manager, the floor manager, the location manager, a sort of half accountant, and so he did all those jobs together. And at the end of the series, Paul was setting up an independent production company, so he was kind of busy. So he just said, edit the shows, which is what I did.
Okay.
So that's how I learned to edit, by editing the second series of The Young Ones.
Did doing all of those jobs kind of prepare you well, do you think, to go on to produce stuff?
Yes, I mean, producing was slightly different in those days. So, like, producing Bottom would be, it's not the same job as it is now. And you won't really find many producer-directors. I mean, there are people called producer-directors, but they're not producing as in terms of producing a whole series or something like that, because the way that the broadcastings worked and the way that money works, it was much more flexible in those days. What happened to me was, that I was producing and directing for a while with Red Dwarf and Bottom, and after that, it came to a point where you're going to go, well, you're either going to produce or direct. You can't do both,
Right.
because the producer is the one now in charge of looking after the money, and the director is the one in charge of spending it.
Yeah.
And so I find myself having to give myself a bollocking a lot for overspending. And then I thought, well, what are the choices? I like directing more than producing, so I went that way.
Okay.
Did you meet Rik and Ade for the first time on set, or did you see their stuff live before you worked with them on a show, or how did that happen?
There used to be a lot of comedy clubs in London, and there would be a lot of new comedy comedians around, alternative comedians. And so I would go and watch a lot of those. I'm trying to remember if I ever met Rik or Ade through that. I don't think so. But obviously once we started rehearsing for The Young Ones.
Well, can you remember your first impression of them at all?
Yeah, I thought they were brilliant. I saw them on stage, and I thought that, you kind of think, God, these are great. These guys are great. This is what I want to do. These are the people I want to work with. And I think they'd been on TV as the Dangerous Brothers before then, and I was a big fan of that when they did Saturday Night, well, the UK version of Saturday Night Live. I can't actually remember the first time I met them. Probably at somebody's party and I got drunk. Probably. Or the club called the Zanzibar and got drunk. Or something like that.
Sure.
Chances are you were drunk, though, when it happened.
Well, yes.
Are you drunk right now?
Yes, I'm drunk now.
So you also directed a few episodes of Filthy Rich and Catflap. Is that right? My favourite scene in that is the Trivial Pursuit scene, where that feels like a scene out of Bottom. It really, that's where it feels like it's kind of hitting, it's finding its feet and stuff and things. Did you direct that episode?
No, what I was directing then is I was directing the outside stuff.
Okay,
The
so
stuff
the
with
film
shots,
stuff.
The film stuff.
Okay.
I didn't do the multi-camera stuff because Paul did that. But the film stuff, we did shoot one sequence which I really liked, which is where a taxi flies into the Manchester Ship Canal and sinks, right? And we turned up for the recce. I mean, okay, so the taxi goes in here and disappears under the water. We went, oh, great. And then the special effects guy, genius, called Peter Ragg, got into the water and he went, it's only a foot deep. Shit. So in the end, we sent the taxi into the water and then obviously cut off to something else. And we then had just a roof of a taxi, which was sunk under the foot to make it disappear. I was really pleased with that.
Magic of TV.
Yeah, and that was a nice exotic shoot, actually, thinking about it.
So obviously you got 3 of the young ones in that show. Was there like a shadow over that series from cast by the young ones? Was there any? Do you know what I mean? Did it feel like?
Oh, you mean in Filthy Rich and Catflap?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think because the young ones was written by Ben Elton and Lisa Mayer and Rik Mayall, and I think Catflap was principally written by Ben. So it didn't quite have the collaborative power that the other ones did. But I mean, I really liked it. I thought it was a funny show, and it was more in the same style. But it didn't go down quite as well.
Yeah, but you can see the genesis of Richie and Eddie in Filthy Rich and Catflap before they went on to Bottom.
Mixed up with the Dangerous Brothers.
Yeah, sure. Is that the first time they used the character names Richie and Eddie? Might be.
Might be.
I think it is.
Pass. I'll be saying that a lot.
But it's an interesting kind of progress in that the Young Ones is about youth and so forth, and then Filthy Rich and Catflap is kind of about an entry into the world of media and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's this sort of myth, which is probably true, that if you make TV shows about TV, they're less popular. Yeah, there's probably some truth in that.
I think people are interested in the minutiae and the behind the scenes workings, but they're sometimes there are in jokes, aren't there, that maybe people don't fully get.
It's not recognisable to your average Joe blogs.
Yeah, I found that people just do not want to hear that it's not a great, amazing, magical place where all your dreams come true.
I know, but they need to know. Yeah, I think so. I think it's also like when you celebrate the industry that you're working in that way. For some viewers, it feels like that they're watching a party that they haven't been invited to.
It's a good analogy.
So the pilot for Bottom was, I believe, shot in 1989. You directed the pilot as well as the rest of the series, didn't you?
Yes.
Do you remember how it was sort of first pitched to you? Were you approached? Did you hear about it and asked to work on it?
Well, what happened was that Paul Jackson was involved in the genesis of that show. But then because he'd left and set up his own company, it was sort of left hanging in the air. I was always down to direct it and him to produce. But because he was unable to produce it, it sort of just fell into my lap, really. Yeah. So we shot the first episode. And I remember Alan Yentob, who was then head of BBC Two, came round to our house. I don't know why. He said to me, now this pilot thing, Bottom. I went, yes. He said, can you change the name? I went, no. And he said, so tell me, who's actually in charge of this project? And I said, well, I am. He went, yes. No, but actually, who really is in charge of this project? I said, it's me. He went, what? He said, yeah, I'm producing and directing it. He went, shit. He said, keep me informed. I went, okay. He said, listen, I need to do some trade-offs. He said, if you want a series, you've got to cut some stuff out. And so I said, yeah, sure, no problem, and then just didn't do it.
Right. Do you remember what he wanted cut out?
That's a very good question. Because when anyone says that's a good question, it means they don't know the answer.
Because the show was called Your Bottom or My Bottom is something that is sometimes bandied around, and that had to be dropped.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we hung on to that. It was something within it. It might have been something to do with... I don't know. I have to come back to you on that.
I wonder if it would have been something like the darker elements. The pilot episode opens with Richie pretending to, attempting suicide in a sort of way to get Eddie to buy him a drink, which I think is wonderfully dark. But I wonder if that's the kind of thing that would worry someone at the BBC.
No, that didn't worry them, funny enough. And I sort of came up with that because I thought it'd be funny that it looked like he's about to kill himself and he's not at all. No, it wasn't that. It was more to do with anything to do with wanking.
Right.
So if there's anything in that episode to do with wanking, then
there's loads.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, well there you go. You wanted half the show for that. But we didn't cut any of it. But I sort of said we would just to secure the series, and then we just let it run.
I mean, you must have felt quite vindicated down the line when the show went on to, run for several series. A lot of the jokes were based around that kind of theme.
Yeah, I mean, you learn by experience. So once they. I mean, all credit should go to Rik and Ade, really. I mean, who wrote it? Yeah. Because that's the starting point. You can't do anything without a script. Yeah. And it's easy for a director to shag up a good script, but it's impossible for a director to make a bad script good. Yeah. So that's sort of the essence of it. And of course, once we've done the pilot, then by learning through experience, you can then develop the series.
What was it like directing them, considering that they wrote the show as well? It's often said that they were very, very much perfectionists. So to direct the actors who also wrote it...
Well, in a way, I prefer that, because then I've got the people who wrote it sitting in front of me, and I can then say to them, well, what was in your head, you know?
Right.
And it's rare that they would come up and go, well, I don't understand this line, because they wrote it. I like that, because then you've got in their heads, they know exactly what they want to do.
Yeah.
So there's less sort of lost in translation business. So they were pretty precise, although interestingly, that in your podcast about the fight in that episode in the bathroom, that was sort of worked out literally 4 days before we did it.
Right.
So, the special effects guys had to, at the last minute, get cabinets that you can smash over people's heads and breakable doors and things. And I remember being in rehearsal and saying to Rik and Ade, look, it just says fight sequence. Can we actually nail what it is that we want to do?
Yeah.
And eventually, I kept putting it off, and eventually I went, yeah, okay, this is what we're going to do.
Okay.
And then I looked at it and went, shit, that's good. But man, how are we going to do this in 3 days?
Yeah.
But we did it.
Did you have a fight choreographer, or did they kind of plan it? Was it between all of you?
They're very good at it. They don't need anyone to show them how to take punches and stuff or throw them. No, I mean, that sequence was unusual in those days, is that I decided to shoot it with one camera, just handheld, covering each moment so it gets cut together.
Yeah.
So it's more shot like a film, that
Right.
little sequence. And it worked really well because it was handheld. It gives that kind of dynamism.
Was
Is that the right word? Dynamism.
Dynamicness.
Dynamism.
Was this before or after the Marooned episode of Red Dwarf? Because you did a similar thing with that, in that you shot a single camera handheld.
Yeah. I can't remember. But I'm quite a fan of handheld stuff. I mean, one of the reasons for that is that we do a lot of stuff. When I was working with Ruby on Channel 4, we would do a lot of in the street stuff.
Right.
And you notice that if it's dynamic, if she's running around, you follow over it becomes much more dynamic.
Yeah.
And also, handheld sometimes gives you a sense of realism. And I think the reason for that is that people are used to seeing news reports where they're running around and whashing cameras all over the place. So if you shoot handheld, it kind of gives it a bit more life. And so I did Marooned in the same way. In fact, I shot an entire series of a sitcom called The 10 Percenters, all handheld. All the cameras were handheld.
Yeah.
But, of course, it was knackering for the cameraman. So I come down to the studio floor and most of them be sitting on chairs, but handheld.
Rubbing their necks.
Saying, you bastard.
When you were directing Rik and Ade, was there ever any times that, obviously they were the writers, they would have had a very strong idea of things. Was there ever any times when you sort of came up against them directing, in that you thought something should have been done differently, or you had a very clear idea of a way a scene should have been done, but they had other ideas?
No, not really. I tell you, the reason being is because it's a sitcom, you get 4 or 5 days rehearsal beforehand in an outside rehearsal room. So you iron out all the problems there. And it's not so much like, is this right or is this funny? Yeah. It's more like, how the hell do we do this? Right. There was one episode where Ade was dressed up as Death in a black cowl at night, and so all the lights were low. And of course, I knew it was going to happen, but when we started to shoot it, you couldn't see him at all.
Right.
And I said to the lighting director, he looks like a black blob. And the lighting director said, that's because that's what he is. Anyway, we managed to get it to work. But it's more, certainly with Bottom, there's no disagreement about what the content of it was. It was just how you get there. And sometimes you change stuff. They would change stuff, or I'd suggest we change stuff. But they're very much their own guys, If I made a suggestion, it was fine, and if I made a suggestion, it was crap, they just ignored it.
Yeah. Was there any sort of difference in their working style on this one? Because it was mainly just the two of them, than there had been on, say, Filthy Rich or The Young Ones or anything like that?
Not that I saw, but you have to remember that they sat down forever in an office somewhere, or somebody's house or a flat somewhere, and wrote these things. Yeah. And I don't know if the style of writing changed. from before. No, I mean, once we get to rehearsal, once you've got the scripts, you follow the process that you know best.
What was the sort of delay between you getting the pilot script and then getting the Series 1 scripts? Was there a gap?
Well, we shot the pilot, and as soon as they commissioned the series, then they started writing. And they produced all the scripts before we started, thank God. So you could plan it a little bit more carefully than you would if scripts are being delivered as they roll in. It would have been difficult for them to do that anyway, performing it.
Yeah.
You have to get all the scripts in first.
Was there any reason that you remember that Contest was, of course, filmed as the pilot, but wasn't actually shown as the first episode? Smells went out as the first ever episode. Contest is third in the run.
I think the reason for that is, and it quite often happens with pilots, is that by the time you've done your series, your pilot is not as good as the other shows. Not because it's not as good, that's not right, but it's because it was the first one made, you've learnt a lot more with the others. So we thought that Smells would work best as a first episode. And
really
sort
does.
of steered it that way deliberately, and then put Contest further down.
Did you more or less shoot them in the order that they are broadcast in, or it worked on one episode at a time, I'd imagine, because it's studio audience?
Yeah, more or less. I have to be honest, I can't remember. But the other thing is that with a show like that, it's impossible to do all the editing until you finished it all. I mean, you do the editing for the way we would shoot it is that we would have a multi-camera studio, and on the first day, the pre-record day, is without an audience, and so you record big scenes or stuff that involves a lot of effects, things that are difficult to do in front of an audience.
Piano coming through the...
Yeah, exactly. Or anything that quite often some of the violence would be done as a pre-record because you've got to. It's a stop-start thing, and it would be disappointing for the audience to see it in bits. So you try and do all the narrative stuff on the second day. So on the first day we'd shoot the pre-records, and then I would edit them, and then they would be played in the right story order to the audience on the second day. But outside of that, you couldn't really do any more post-production until you finish the whole shows. So you sometimes reserve judgment on transmission order until you've cut them together and see how they sit. You get a good idea, but
There are so many fantastic scenes in Bottom. Obviously, the fight scenes. I mean, the chess fight is a one that sticks in, I think, everyone's memories. Are there any other particular scenes that caused some difficulties, or that you went home and felt really proud of achieving?
Well, it's funny you should mention that episode, the chess scene, because it was like a non-stop piece of narrative. And normally in a sitcom you stop and you go back and either reshoot the scene again, or you do pickups, or you do retakes, or whatever. This one just kept going on and on and on, and I sort of thought, we could just shoot this all in one take, the entire episode. And I said, we have to force some breaks into this, guys, because otherwise I'm going to be making you go back and do stuff where costume and blood and everything else has now started to have to be taken off. So we forced some gaps, and we couldn't think what we would work. And so simply because we needed to force gaps into that show, we came up with an idea of seeing how much custard you can get into your underpants competition. And that was simply to force a break into it. And that was pre-recorded. Otherwise, I would have had nothing to pre-record. And
That's
I would have wasted the
interesting,
studio.
because we wondered, it doesn't feel very Bottom to have that cutaway. Does it?
It was just a ridiculous idea we came up with. And it's always nice to see the crew who come in to watch a run through in the outside rehearsals before we get to the studio, so you can see what we're going to do. And the senior cameraman just not shaking his head and going, only on this show.
So if that was a kind of spontaneous moment how did you prepare all the custard over the waters? Did you some poor prop guy sweating custard?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, it came out of rehearsal, so it wasn't actually in the physical studio on the day, but it was only a few days before. So again, Peter Ragg invented this sort of giant pair of iron underpants that he wore, and then the trousers were made to fit on top of it, and it was full of custard.
So a quick one. I assume the sound effects are played live while recording. Was that the case?
Yes, anything that was pre-recorded, obviously we'd stick the effects on, but generally speaking, yes, we play them live. It was something that came out of the young ones, and we kept the tradition going. And also, it's much funnier.
Yeah.
You know. So we have a selection of sound effects that we developed over the years.
Were they your exclusive sound effects then for
Sometimes
Rik
they
and
were,
Ade to
yeah. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they're a mixture of things. You know, like bone cracks. Weirdly, we discovered that plastic stirrers, if you twist them, make a sort of cracking noise. So we recorded a lot of those. We sliced up. Again, some of this was developed in the young ones, but we'd slice up melons and smash up cabbages, and also you then, because it's quite Tom and Jerry like, we take quite a lot of punches from westerns.
Right.
So like John Wayne would go, "I ain't gonna hit you, the hell I ain't." Smack. You know, it's a sound. If it was that sound accurately reflected what he did, the guy's jaw would have shot off into another county. But so we used a lot of those and mixed them up. We definitely play them live. And okay, if you miss it by a few, you know, but by a nanosecond, you can always pull the effect back in the edit to make it bang on. But there was one sequence. So Jem Whippy, I think, was the sound supervisor. I think Nick Roast was the gram op who fires the button for the effects. And I think it was the episode with the burglar, played by Paul Bradley. And he's under, I think either he's under the carpet, but anyway, whatever happens is that Rik punches him, and then Ade hits him with a frying pan.
Sellotaped to the ceiling?
He was sellotaped to the ceiling, but I think he comes down. But he's been beaten to death on the floor. It may not be.
Unless you're thinking of the gas man.
Maybe I'm thinking of the gas man. It's the gas man. I got it all wrong. Cut all that out. Shit.
No, it's quite similar. Yeah.
It's similar. So the punching, that's right, it was gas man. So what happened was Rik punches him, Ade hits him on the head. Rik punches him, Ade hits him on the head. And that was like, the system was we're going to do about 5 of those and then stop. So, but then the competition started between Rik and Ade and the sound guy, Nick, and Jem. So he punched him again, and again. Frying pan comes in, more punching, another frying pan, a bit more punching, another frying pan. Each time he's hitting his button trying to get the sound effect bang on, and he did really well. And then Rik threw him by pretending to punch and then rubbing his hand and then punching him. And Nick still, I could see him go, "Whoa, no, yes, now." No. And it just went on forever. And I thought it's one of those moments where you just sit in the gallery watching this and you sit back and just go, let's just let it play out and see what happens. And they just kept it going. It was very funny.
Yeah, I've always wondered at that scene because it is such a long, extended scene with the frying pan, and then
I know. I mean, I think I might have cut it down a bit, but it still went on forever. Yeah, it's very funny. The sound effects were vital, really. They became integrally part. They had they were another character.
Oh yeah, we often single out our favourite sound effects of each episode of the
and some podcast. Of them are obviously beefed up later on, but we like to at least play some of them live.
They are often very uniquely, recognisably Bottom-esque sound effects. They're not the kind of thing I think you hear elsewhere in the BBC sound library.
Not really, no. I mean, Vic and Bob probably have something similar. But then a lot of those sound effects were developed for the young ones.
Right.
I think there's a bit in the young ones where Rik gets hit in the bollocks with a cricket bat. And he goes, "Ha ha, missed both my legs." And the sound effect for that was developed by a guy called Phil Tyler. And he literally spent the weekend smashing melons with a cricket bat to get the right sound.
Perfect one.
And then brought it into work.
That's amazing.
Sound design, full credit due
Fantastic.
to those guys.
And I've read that there was 35 minutes per episode of Bottom that were actually filmed, and then it would be cut down. Is that true? Because there are some added lines in the script books that aren't in the final cut.
Yes, that is true. I mean, we had to bring in the show at 30 minutes. So what would happen is, yes, quite often we'd shoot a lot more. There was one episode where we came in at 45 minutes.
Wow.
And we had to chop 15 minutes out. Part of the reason for that is that it's always good to have a little bit left over, so you can cut something that doesn't quite land.
Yeah.
And the other reason is that the audience sometimes can get quite hysterical. And if the laughs get longer and longer and longer, you kind of have to act your way through them, but it just adds time. So the two options you've got is you can chop the laugh back so that you can keep things going, which occasionally I've done. But if something gets a big laugh, it's such a glorious moment. You don't want to let it go.
Yeah.
So what happens is all these laughs add up, and they start to add up, and they can go up to 3-4 minutes of extra time, which you've now got to find somewhere else.
I understand. So there are some scenes on the cutting room floor then that never made it to even the bottom enlargement video.
Yeah, there are, but to say that they're scenes is probably not right. What we do is we internally nip bits out. So, to be honest with you, I mean, it would be lovely to say, oh, here's a marvellous gem of brilliance that's lying undiscovered. But the thing is, if it was that marvellous, we would have put it out.
Yes.
So it's bits. You pull bits out, little lines, bits of dialogue, stuff like that.
Do they exist anywhere?
Probably. I mean, yes. I mean, I think the BBC, we used to shoot that on 1 inch. So it depends whether they've kept them or not.
They're probably sat in an archive somewhere in a storage
Possibly,
room.
yeah. I mean, I do remember when we remastered Red Dwarf, we dug out the old 1 inch tapes, but as we played them, it looked like a pile of cocaine was falling off them because they built up this powder like you get with battery acid on these old tapes. And as we played it, this stuff was just pouring on the floor, and we thought, shit, this will never work. But somehow they did. So if they're there, then it's there. Yeah. But I mean, I wouldn't hold your breath because there'd be bits that we all agreed didn't quite work.
There are often comparisons drawn between the characters and the grimy set design and the actual direction between Bottom and Steptoe and Son. Ade himself has said that him and Rik pretty much ripped off their act. Was that something that they discussed with you prior to recording Bottom, or was it something that happened?
No, that was something they developed. I mean, all of these things happen. A lot of this stuff happens in the writing process. So they kind of perform it as they're writing it to check it out, to make sure it works. And there is a Steptoe kind of thing that they obviously developed as they were writing it. But
were you a fan of Steptoe and Son?
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought Steptoe and Son was fantastic. Yeah, there was one episode where I think he made a Christmas pudding out of a potty. It was just disgusting. I loved it. Yeah, so a lot of that stuff happens in the writing process, and I'm not there for that. I land, I join it once the scripts are written. Yeah,
there are a lot of parallels, though, I think, between how you have the close-up on Harry H. Corbett in Steptoe and Son and him, Albert in the background, and in Bottom you get a lot of that with Richie and Eddie kind of
you're bound to.
Back and forth.
Plus
and I'll always be influenced by stuff I've seen, obviously, so even subconsciously I ripped it off.
Plus, in terms of the episodes, there's an episode of Steptoe and Son where they're playing chess with different pieces, which you see in that.
That's a nick. But they didn't have such a spectacular fight sequence after it.
No.
That's the biggest difference, I think. Isn't it?
What a different Steptoe and Son would have been if it.
Because it being an old man,
it did have violence. There was a lot of violence between Steptoe and Son, but not quite in the same way that Rik and Ade brought to Richie and Eddie. They went a step further.
You're right, not quite sort of ripping. They had a skeleton in their set. I always remember that, Steptoe and Son. You thought, well, that would be an obvious prop, wouldn't it? Beating somebody to death with a femur.
So what did the BBC think of the show while it was being recorded, before it went out? Was the internal feeling behind it?
Well, the internal feeling behind it was, and Alan Yantov said this to me, get on and do it. I don't want anything to do with it. If it goes well, fine. If it doesn't, it's all your fault. And I went, perfect. I'm left alone to do this with Rik and Ade, and we'll make our show and do it the way we want to do it. And so nobody interfered. After we'd shot it and the executives had to review it, they wanted to make lots of cuts and lots of changes because they said it was too filthy. And we did have to make a few nips and tucks. It's sort of things like reactions. There's an episode where Helen Lederer plays...
in Natasha?
Yeah. And Rik has a premature ejaculation. And it was pretty obvious when we shot it.
Kind of cut around that. It's just
we had to cut it down.
underpants.
Yeah. I mean, and what I heard was that they said, "Oh, we were sending somebody in to cut out all the stuff." I said, "No, you're not. No, I'm coming. And I battled and fought, to keep what we could, but without losing the jokes or the funniness of it. But yeah, there were one or two times we had to do some judicious cutting around to get to get it past the censor. Yeah.
Did they ever injure themselves? Were there any times?
Yes, once. They're very good. They're very, very good at choreographing it and making it look so close and getting really close. There was once when Ade was doing a backhanded punch. So, in other words, coming up beneath Rik's jaw and going over his head, and he smacked his hand into a beam that was above his head, and his hand raised up, a huge welt red. Oh shit! He's broken his arm, broken his hand, but he just bruised it really badly, and that got better. And then there's other times he's dragged across the floor, and we had a trolley that he lay on. So that he was.
When his leg's broken?
No, this is Ade.
Okay.
He's been dragged towards.
Being pulled.
Yeah.
He's got a rope around his leg.
Yeah, exactly.
Being pulled upstairs.
Yes.
And there was a trolley underneath him, and the trolley had padding on it, with the padding carrying him off. So the metal of the so he had great welts up his back.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, they were pretty good, and the special effects guys are very good. So if Rik is bashing down the stairs or crashing through a door or smacking things over each other's heads, we make sure that those props worked really well and were safe.
It was nearly always them doing it, wasn't it? Would they occasionally use a stunt guy for things like coming down through a conservatory roof or the crashing down of the piano, or was that always them?
As far as I remember, it was always them.
Wow.
Don't think we used any stuntmen.
I think there's
in the
one
studio.
Credited
stuntman.
stuntman.
There's one
Really?
credit for the stuntman on the burglar episode, I think.
Is there?
Where Ade crashes through the conservatory is what we thought it is.
Could be. Could be.
There's
Or
one
it could be that we strapped him to the ceiling rather than the actor.
Ah,
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Because the reality of that was that nowadays I wouldn't dream of doing that. You'd lay somebody on the floor and then cover them in sellotape and then electronically put them into the ceiling. But on that one, we thought, we'll just do it for real.
Yeah.
So there was a rig above the ceiling which held him up there. Obviously, the sellotape didn't do it, folks. Sorry.
Oh, I thought he was just putting his head through and it was a fake body. He was actually...
I think that's right.
Oh, wow.
And was strapped to the roof. Yeah, you're right. It could have been a stuntman for that. You're right.
There's one that you made me think of an injury I think I spotted in the episode Smells when they're buying the condoms. And Eddie whacks the condom machine. You see the machine dent, and then he holds his hand back. He plays it like that's really happened. I don't know. Do you remember if that was?
Yeah, he really did punch it, and I think he hurt his hand.
That was a genuine.
Yeah. But he just keeps going.
Well, yeah, it's in character, isn't it? It just seemed to me like that dent wasn't a big enough dent to be a gag. It looked really real.
Yeah, he probably overhit it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So on the subject of Paul Bradley, you've had a lot of Red Dwarf actors come onto Bottom. You've had Robert Llewellyn and Mark Williams, Paul Bradley, Lee Corns. Were you responsible for the crossover in casting at all? Did you suggest actors ever?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those guys. Well, Robert Llewellyn, obviously from Red Dwarf, but Lee Corns was also in the Young Ones, and he also did the warm up on the Young Ones. He was brilliant, actually. So he was a natural choice, and the casting was normally people. We cast it. I mean, Rik and Ade and myself cast all of Bottom. We didn't use a casting agent. It would normally be people we've all worked with, either from the Young Ones and also Red Dwarf. And Paul Bradley was known to all of us. It's kind of like people we know. Yeah.
Was there any plans that never came to fruition about putting Nigel Planner in an episode ever?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember that. No.
Cut that question.
Not that I know of. Yeah, sorry, that was a really dull answer.
No, I asked Ade the same thing and he didn't remember.
Yeah, we assumed Spud Gunn was meant to be played by Nigel Planner, but no.
Yeah, that's often seems to be a natural assumption by people that the intention was to have all four of them at some point.
Could have been. Never came to fruition, though.
Did you find by the time you came to series 2, it felt like this series sort of hit its stride? Were there any differences once you went into series 2, or was it very much were you kind of sort of well-oiled machine, having done series 1?
Yeah, it was a continuation of the same, really. I mean, we thought that the first series was pretty good. Obviously, you improve on little bits and pieces, and we did have a discussion about what other effects we could do, what other things we could inject into the series. And by that stage, of course, Bottom had started to become quite popular. So the attitude of the executives changed slightly. They still left us alone to get on with it. But I do remember meeting Alan Yentup. Sorry, I keep talking about Alan Yentup again, and he came up to me and went, "How we got away with episode 3, I don't know." I went, "We? Who's we?"
Did the executives leave you alone more in the second series then, and just trust you to get on with it, or did they still want to look at it in terms of censoring it?
They did exactly the same. So they just let me alone to shoot it all and put it all together, and then they looked at it and said, "We want to cut this and that."
Right.
And this, and it was exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, when you consider now the constraints on shooting with the enthusiastic, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, with the enthusiastic help of producers as you're shooting it and in preparation, in pre-production and in post-production, it was a remarkable time where we were left alone to do it ourselves.
You directed series 1 to 4 of Red Dwarf. We were wondering if the reason you didn't then do series 5 and 6 is because by this point Bottom was coinciding with it and it was a sort of scheduling conflict.
It was a scheduling conflict, but weirdly it wasn't Bottom. It was Ruby's show.
Okay.
Oh.
Ruby asked me to direct her show The Full Wax for BBC One, big studio show.
Yep.
And Red Dwarf hadn't got its commission. There was a problem with it bouncing back and forth between BBC Manchester and various other things. And so in the end, Ruby pressurised me to say yes, and then literally a week later, they said we got the commission. I went, shit, I can't say no to Ruby.
You might say no to the wife.
Yes, I think, yes, that would be a sort of testicles on the lamppost kind of decision. So I had to pass on 5 and 6, purely because scheduling, and Bottom fitted.
Right.
In those days, I sort of really be able to shoot 2 series a year. You can't do that now, but in those days you could.
So it meant you could squeeze in Bottom then?
How dare you?
You could squeeze in Ruby and Bottom. Yeah?
Yes, I could squeeze in Ruby and Bottom. Could be the name of my book.
And then so the third series of Bottom came around, I think shot in 94 and broadcast in 95. Were you offered that, or were you, was that something that was punted your way, or, were you already busy?
No, you get quite a bit of warning as a producer and a director. So if the scripts have been commissioned, they then have to write the scripts, which takes months. So you know by then that that's the time scale you've got. So you try and make yourself available. It was just, those are the good old days. It was just a given. I was doing it and they wanted me to do it, so I did it.
Yeah.
There wasn't any sort of like going for interviews or anything like that.
Yeah. But by the third series, so obviously that was directed by Bob Spears.
Yeah, the third series was a scheduling cock-up.
Yeah.
On my part, I said yes to a film series called The Detectives, and it clashed.
Right.
And I couldn't get out of it.
Yeah.
It was a shame.
If you'd been free, you'd have done it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
God, yeah.
What did you see series 3 when it went out? I assume.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yeah.
I'd say Bob Spears was a genius director. You look at some of the stuff he did with French and Saunders, those film parodies he shot.
Yeah.
He was really, really good. And of course he did Fawlty Towers. He's the sort of guy I'd look up to and go, I want to be like him.
So if you were going to hand it over to anyone, it would be him.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it was Rik and Ade's decision to get him in.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't do it.
Were you aware of the fourth series having been written and then subsequently not commissioned by the BBC at the time?
I'm not aware of a fourth series at that time. But a few years ago, there was a desire to do another one.
Okay.
But it didn't make it.
So as far as we understood it, perhaps just several episodes had been written and then were repurposed for the live shows.
Oh, that's possibly true. I wasn't across the politics of that, so I wouldn't know.
Okay.
Being an humble director, that's possibly true.
I think when the fourth series was commissioned, it was looking like it was going to be Hooligans Island. So I think that's what then became the third live show. I think
you're right. I think we were going to make Hooligans Island. And then I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, we were going to do another series called Hooligans Island for TV. But there was all sorts of machinations about budget by the stage and things. And what had been written was extraordinary. They were on the island and there's a hurricane. So everything is sideways, because of the wind.
Right.
So the way we would shoot it is to turn them sideways and make everything fall through the frame, so it looks like it's going sideways. It was going to be a monster. I looked at it and I thought, Christ, how are we going to shoot this? But then sadly it didn't come to fruition. And then I tried with John Plowman, who's very good, possibly the best producer in the world, after Paul Jackson. We tried to see if we could turn it into a special, which would have been great, but the BBC didn't want it as a special.
I see.
Isn't there going to be an old folks' home idea as well? I've heard that in an interview of basically Rik and Ade in a retirement home.
I heard about that, yeah. Yeah, that would have been funny, wouldn't it?
It would have been.
Wheelchairs comes to mind.
Yeah.
And cliffs.
They said hitting each other with colostomy bags.
Yes. And jousting in wheelchairs.
But of course, you directed Hooligans Island, the third Bottom live. Was it different directing Rik and Ade for the stage as opposed to in the studio?
I have to be honest here. What happened with that was that the stage shows were directed by themselves. They directed them in terms of the action and everything else. I'm not really a stage director anyway. So what I did is I filmed it. So once the show was up and running, I think we did Bristol, I'd come in and I'd shoot a couple of episodes and then cut them together. And I kind of judiciously didn't cut anything out of them. They were as they ran.
I see.
But one of the things we did want to do, and I discussed this with Ade and Rik, was that we wanted it to be obviously a live show, but we wanted it to look as much as we possibly could like a sitcom. So there's no cutaways of audience or big fat wide shots except at the very beginning or end, and just keep it all on the stage and keep it all in Bottom land.
Was it stitched together a couple of different nights' performances?
Yeah, a couple of different performances. Yeah, I shot 2. And with the live shows, if I'm shooting live shows like that, I always try and shoot 2 episodes, because it gives you, it's like a second take. I can't stop the play halfway through and go, stop, you go back. You didn't hit him hard enough.
It would be quite funny.
Yeah. I mean, actually, yes, it would be weird. So what I would do is I would shoot the first one and I'd look at it and go, that bit needs to be, we haven't got that, so we need that. You do it that way. And then say to Rik and Ade, I've got a problem in between this show and that show. I didn't quite get the shot. Can you angle yourself around a bit more? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you may not be able to answer this then, but fans often argue about whether or not the fluffs in Bottom Live were purposefully written in, or whether they happened genuinely and then they were repeated on subsequent nights because of the big laughs that they got. Do you know whether they were written in specifically in a calculated way?
I don't know, but I can guess. It was very rare in those days for Rik ever to forget a line.
But the audience love it. When
it was funny, actually. Yeah. When I was shooting, I think it was Hooligans Island when they did that, I was shooting it and I was listening to a guy while we were waiting to do the second show, and he went, "It's amazing, I've seen this show before, and they forgot their lines at exactly the same place."
Yes, I've always believed they were written in for the laugh.
Audiences like that feeling of something unique happening on just their night, don't they?
Sure, they were special for that time.
Just breaking script and having fun on the stage. That's the magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
So have you caught yourself being influenced by Bottom in other pieces of work you've done? Have you felt like you've done something this is a little bit like Bottom?
Yeah, for sure. With studio sitcoms, if there's anything like some of the green screen stuff we played around with, and also if anyone's having a fight and somebody's, we need a stuntman, I go, no, hang on, I'll show you how to do this. Aim for there, and I'll put the camera here. And so violent stuff.
Okay.
Comedy violence is my favourite. So I carry that over as much as I can. And you pick up skills all the way through about various things, about how to shoot stuff and how to create the effect and the illusion.
also another IMDb credit of yours is the behind-the-scenes stuff for Guest House Paradiso.
Yes.
So what story there? Were you off the film and didn't do it?
No,
'Cause
it was an
didn't it?
interesting story that happened there, is that Guest House Paradiso they wrote together, and Adrian decided he was going to direct it, which was fine. Obviously, it's his film. I'd have loved to have directed it, but obviously, that's the decision they wanted to do, and that was absolutely fine. But ironically, he was also up for another film, which he couldn't do because he was directing Bottom, and he suggested me to Harry Enfield, and that was Kevin and Perry Go Large. Yeah. The background, yes, behind the scenes. I've seen some of these behind-the-scenes things, and I thought they were sort of not very good. We had no money, but what I did do is I got a load of film students, and we got GoPros, or the equivalent of, and put them on sticks and held them up over the top of sets so we could shoot from above what was going on. I got a lot of good footage on that, and the interviews were great. And once we put it together, I was quite pleased with that. I thought, for the limited resources we had, I thought it was pretty good. Yeah. There's some really talented young guys working on that. One of whom now does all the special effects for things like Harry Potter and shows like that. He's done very well. Blast his eyes.
Do you, what's your sort of order of preference in terms of films versus studio work and so forth? Are films is it a nice change from it?
They're different beasts, and I can do both, because if you shoot a sitcom, normally, Bottom's an exception, but normally you'd have some outside stuff, which is then shot and played in to the audience. So I can kind of do both. And unfortunately, sitcoms are going through what one would call a low point at the moment. There's not many being made. There's things like Not Going Out and stuff that's still going, but generally speaking, sitcoms are narrative comedy, live audience shows are suffering a bit. So I've sort of found myself doing more single camera work. In fact, I'm doing one this year with Johnny Vegas. They're completely different disciplines. I enjoy doing both. Some have high points and some have low points. The great thing about shooting in front of an audience, it happens as you see it, as you do it. If you're shooting single camera, you're always out of order, it's out of sequence. You're not certain it's all going to work until it's all put together. Whereas with a sitcom, it's like, as a lighting director once described it, he said, you rehearse and you try and get everything right, absolutely everything right. Then the audience come in, it's 7:30 and you fall off a cliff. and that's how, and that's very exciting, a much more theatrical event. But they're equally good and they're equally difficult, but for different reasons.
Are there any episodes of Bottom that were pitched to you that never happened? Any scripts that you heard about that ended up being dropped? The imaginary episodes or missing episodes.
Not that I can remember. I think that they decided what they were going to do and just wrote them. I'm sure there's discarded ideas, but I didn't see them, or if I did, I've forgotten. Sorry.
So, have you seen much of Rik and Ade's work after you worked with them?
Oh yeah,
Have you a consistent fan?
Absolutely. I saw Ade recently. It was just before the Star Wars he was in, but he wasn't allowed to tell me he was in Star Wars. So he said, you have to guess what I'm in. And I went, why can't you tell me? He said, no. I said, well, it's either Marvel or Star Wars. He'd been shooting some Russian classic series. What was it called?
War and Peace, wasn't it?
War and Peace, that's the one. The not very well-known War and Peace. He'd been shooting that. And I said, how's it going? He went, I had a great week last week. I said, oh, right, what were you doing? He said, well, I was mainly dead. I went, oh, good. And I said, how did that work? He said, well, my character dies, and then there's a funeral, and I'm in this glass thing, and I lie there. And I lay there for about a week. I went, bloody hell. I said, couldn't you go and somebody else do that? You could have made a dummy or something. He went, no, mate, I loved it. Just lying there doing nothing for a week.
The reason he got that gig apparently is because Ryan Johnson was a huge Bottom fan when he was younger. Have you met any famous, weird people who are fans of Bottom that you wouldn't have thought would be?
Yes, a policeman. He said, I love Bottom.
Yeah.
And hit him, Jenkins.
Were you being arrested at the time?
No, well, I was no, not quite, but nearly. Famous people. Oh, that's hard. Probably. It's just that, when you work with people, you sometimes don't really get the opportunity to talk too much about anything else except what you're doing, you know. I think with making TV, it's very intensive, and you just have to really focus on what you're doing. And by the time it's finished and everyone's in a green room or somewhere swigging cheap white and red wine, they're reminiscing about what you've just done, not what you did in the past. So I'm absolutely certain the Queen's a fan. I just haven't asked her.
Maggie's veg.
Yeah.
Of course, you directed Girls on Top in 1985 to 1986, and that's where you met your then wife-to-be Ruby Wax.
Correct.
You worked alongside French and Saunders, Tracy Ullman, Joan Greenwood. Yes. You've commented in the past that you were quite intimidated by being surrounded by those strong women at the time.
Yeah.
And I believe you thought Ruby didn't actually like you at first.
No, I don't think she did. I wasn't a particularly experienced director at that stage of the game, and she thought I was rubbish, so she tried to get me fired. But I hung on in there. Yeah, you're right. It was that cast that you just mentioned, and also the stage manager, who's also a girl. But Ruby was possibly the most fractious, because I worked with Dawn and Jennifer before, obviously with the young ones and stuff like that. So they kind of were more relaxed about it. And then as rehearsals continued, so it was always outside rehearsals for sitcoms. You always rehearse outside, and then you go into the studio. And as our outside rehearsals changed, then Ruby changed, not just in attitude, but also physically. So she would turn up in her pajamas to start with, and then sort of as the weeks progressed, things would change, like the size of her breasts. And in fact, Dawn French got hold of some falsies that Ruby was wearing to look more alluring, and was waving them about in the rehearsal room. And Ruby was so horrified that she grabbed them and then buried them in a communal garden just next door to rehearsal rooms. As far as I know, they're still there. But I thought one day it'd be good on an anniversary or something, we'd go down there and dig them up and parade down the street, like the end of a Frankenstein film, with burning things and all shouting, "It's the boobs!"
Oh, brilliant. And of course, you and Ruby are now one of comedy's power couples. I mean, did you...
Power couple. I like that.
Did you guys ever socialise with, obviously, Ade and Jennifer and Dawn and Lenny?
Jennifer and Ade are really good friends. We see them a lot, And, of course, I work with Jennifer quite a lot anyway. I've just done a comic relief thing with her, the piss take from Mamma Mia 2.
Oh, brilliant.
And we did another piss take 10 years ago, Mamma Mia 1, so if they make another one, then we'll do that again. So we do see each other, and Adrian and I see each other, for sure.
So there's sort of enduring friendships after you work with them.
Yeah.
That must have started, I suppose, going all the way back to the young ones.
Yes, back to the young ones. Yeah.
To a lot of people, that's a very big moment in comedy. Does the scale of that sort of occur to you, or is it? Do you find yourself sort of slightly bemused or detached from it because you're within it? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You mean about the young ones?
But the young ones, but also alternative comedy moving forwards. Yeah.
No, I could see it was a huge difference. When I read the young one scripts, I thought this is the best thing I've ever read.
Yeah.
And I've read a lot of scripts by then, and worked on a lot of comedy shows. I thought this is the new revolution.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be part of it. No, I was aware that it was going, as a piece of written material.
Yeah.
I thought this is revolutionary. Whether it would make it.
Yeah.
To the degrees that I hoped it would.
Yeah.
I didn't know, but it did.
There's a sort of collection of names of people in front of camera that people are very aware of, but I think there's a collection of names of people behind the camera, of which you are one, as well as Paul Jackson and Peter Ragg and other people who we often see in the credits at the ends of the shows that we consider to be our favourite comedies. And I think it's interesting. There's a very unique collection of creatives behind these things.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that you tend to work with the people you like and The BBC used to allocate people without consulting. It was before something called Producer's Choice.
Yeah.
So you were just given people. But we would do all sorts of devious things to get the people we like on board. So if it's special effects heavy, you would always go for Peter Ragg.
Right.
We would, because we worked with him before and he understands us and he understands what we want, and also he knows what's funny. So we go, this explosion's got to be funny. He'll make it funny.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to tell somebody. You know what I mean? So you tend to gravitate and work with your favourite crew and your favourite people.
Is there anything on now, or that's being made now, that you particularly enjoy, or that when you look at it, you feel that kind of has some of the essence of what Rik and Ade had, and what you've made in the past? Anything that?
I mean, there's degrees of stuff in everything, really. I'm going to self-promote now. Stand by. So later this year, I'm doing a film for TV with Johnny Vegas called, and it's a lampoon of Agatha Christie, called Dial M for Murder, but our version is called Dial M for Middlesbrough. And I've done one before called Death on the Tyne, which was supposed to be Death on the Nile. It has elements of it because people get murdered, but what we wanted to do is try and make the murders as ridiculous as possible. So people get harpooned, or they get beaten to death with a bottle of scent, sort of weird stuff.
Yeah.
And it's the experience you gain over the years where you kind of go, yeah, let's make this really funny, make it ridiculously violent. That sort of thing is happening. Vic and Bob made a great sitcom which was very similar.
Rik?
To the elements of Bottom, I think.
Peep Show as well.
Peep Show. I mean, there's bits and pieces, you know what I mean? It's everyone's influenced by everybody else, but everybody wants to be unique. Nobody wants to make a copy of something, and there'd be no value in that anyway.
No, absolutely. I think Robert Webb said that The Young Ones was a huge influence on him as a performer.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And, of course, British comedy suffered an insurmountable loss when we lost Rik Mayall 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you found out about Rik's death and how it's affected you these last 5 years.
Well, it was bizarre. Rik and I had actually quite a few meetings about trying to work out some projects together. And in fact, he did a thing for me for Channel 4, which was called, bizarrely, Don't Fear Death. And he did the voiceover, and it was really funny. I don't think it ever saw the light of day. I was on a bicycling trip, get this, a bicycling trip in Italy, I think. And I'd heard that a great friend of mine who was a brilliant sound mixer who used to work at the farm, called Stuart, had died suddenly. So I thought, oh, that's horrifying. And he was a great friend. And then I got to the airport to come home and then found out Rik had died as well. So I thought, blimey, this just keeps going. I won't have any friends left. So it was very shocking. And when I got back home, I met up with Harry Enfield, and then I helped him to write a piece about Rik. And it was very, very shocking. I went to the funeral, and it was incredibly sad. And then afterwards he was buried in his country house. They got permission to bury him at home. And people made speeches, Ben Elton principally, amongst others. It was really moving and very sad.
It's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
We obviously, Bottom's our favourite sitcom, and since we lost Rik, we just want to keep the memory of the show and him alive.
Going. Yeah.
It's quite amazing the amount of outpouring of Bottom love when he died. There was loads of people who seemed like coming out of the woodwork as huge fans of it. Because I always thought of it as a bit more of a cult thing, but it turns out there's so much love for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it is the days that we made Bottom, there was BBC One, BBC Two, ITV and Channel 4. That's kind of it, really. And so your viewing choices were limited, but you knew what you wanted to watch. And so it wasn't a question of sort of desperately tuning in to watch. Sometimes it's just on and you watch it, and it becomes part of the fabric of your background without becoming a manic fan, but it becomes part of the fabric of who you are. And then when he died, it suddenly dawned on people that this was part of their heritage, that had shaped their lives. Yeah, I mean, I do meet lots of people. Like if I go to a wedding, for instance, for somebody of the generation beneath me, if they found out that I've directed Bottom, they ply me with drinks until I'm insensible, because it's all part of their fabric, the background of their lives.
When people find out that you directed it, what tends to be the most common thing they ask or say at that point?
Fucking hell. Yeah, no, they look and go, you, Ed, you did it. You did. I mean, yeah, you did Bottom, yeah. And Red Dwarf, you. And then when they found out also about Kevin and Perry, we get the same reaction.
Yeah.
You did that? Shit.
Because, of course, some fans might say that it was your input on Bottom and Red Dwarf and all the shows from our childhood that we loved that added that bit of extra magic.
Oh, I'd love to say.
What would you say to that theory?
Absolutely right. No, I've no idea. No, I think that being in simpatico with the artists is good. So I understand what they want and give them what they want, and sometimes hopefully add a bit to make it even better. But I can't take any more credit than that.
You don't consider yourself a sort of fifth Beatle to the comic strip gang then, from behind the scenes?
No. I'm merely an interface between the script and what appears on the screen. No, I like to think that I can help steer it, but the credit goes to the people who write the scripts, and the people who perform them, and the skilled people who put it together.
Absolutely.
And I sort of steer it, and hopefully, occasionally I'll come up with something that will enhance it or make it better, or come up with an idea that works, but I couldn't really say that I'm a sort of guru creator or anything like that.
You were part of the machine.
Yes. Admittedly, quite a big
slick,
part.
slick
Like
the
the on
oils.
button.
Yeah, exactly.
A large cog, not a small
Without
one.
you, it wouldn't have
Exactly
happened.
You've obviously got a really good eye for talent, though. I mean, you can pick really good projects, it seems.
Yeah, and yes, I think that's true. I mean, you learn a lot as the years go on, and so you can spot something quite quickly in a script when you go, oh yeah, this is good, this has got potential, I like the way it's written, I like the timbre of it, I like the jokes, I like the way that the humour works with the narrative and it doesn't wander off into another county and then come back. There's lots of things you can spot and see, and then when you talk to people, their enthusiasm is massive, and also who they are, whether they perform live, whether you think that they're a good performer and what they can do.
Is there anything that you were offered and didn't do that you regret, that you passed on, that you wish you had done?
No, I've been pretty lucky in that respect. I mean, there's lots of things I would have loved to have done that were done by other people. I mean, Shaun of the Dead, that was me. That was my thing. And stuff like that. No, the only thing I haven't done, and I'd like to address, and maybe I will next year, is I'd love to make a horror comedy, or a comedy horror, whichever way around that word is. And there's a script in development as we speak, and I'd love to do that. Because I've always
Can you say
loved...
if that's written by? Is that a secret?
Yeah, it'll be Susan Nixon and Tim Dawson. Yeah, and the two of them are very talented writers. And so we're coming up with a script idea, which I hopefully will shoot next year.
Fantastic. I mean, there's lots of buzz recently around a lot of new sort of comedy by female writers, such as Fleabag. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is incredible.
Yeah.
But I think it's wonderful. But do you think that some people are perhaps forgetting the spotlight that was sort of thrown on the 1980s, Ruby, French and Saunders, all those ladies that laid the groundwork back then? It's not like it's just suddenly female acts that are being hilarious. I mean,
no, I think that it's true. It's not. Yeah, I don't think suddenly female acts are being suddenly appearing. They've been there for a long time. I mean, French and Saunders. I did a thing with them called 300 Years of French and Saunders in 2017, the end of, and it went out in 2018. So they're still kind of around, not that long ago, you know.
Yeah.
I think it sort of harks to what I said earlier, is that these people become part of the fabric of your lives, and you just absorb them. I don't think you forget them.
I think it's wonderful that there's a new sort of...
Oh, no, I think they're brilliant.
Yeah.
Fleabag is
everyone who's up and coming. Who are your favourite sort of female acts, or any acts really around at the moment?
Well, I'd have to say currently on tour, Ruby Wax.
She is on tour this year, isn't she, all the way through to November?
You're right.
Siblings are quite good. Have you seen them?
Siblings are very good. Yes, they're great. That's it.
Yes.
Keep it in the family.
Siblings are superb. Maddie and Marina, you must be very proud.
I am. Have you seen them?
I have.
Yeah, I've seen them.
I know Maddie. actually.
Oh, excellent.
I've met her a few times, yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a show the other day where they did 10-minute slice, and they've developed 2 new characters, and they're called Judy and Gabe. And these 2 characters are basically obnoxious Chicago middle-aged women. And I know exactly where they got the material from. Ruby took them on holiday to Chicago to visit her cousin, Judy. And when the 2 of them are sitting in the front seat, Ruby and Judy, and going, "That's the best place for bagels." "No, I'm telling you where the best bagel. You don't know where a bagel if it hits you in the face. Look at that. Stop. No, don't. Keep moving. Stop." And the kids are at the back writing this all down. And Judy and Gabe are now appear. Judy, they obviously changed Ruby's name to Gabe for legal and political reasons. But there's very funny characters.
They've got that same eye for spotting where comedy lies in everyday life.
Would you ever like to work with them? Would you ever like to direct them?
Oh, you mean in a TV show or something? Yeah, sure.
They came to you and said, "Dad, we got a commission."
Well, actually, funny enough, if you go onto YouTube, there is something called Schoolgirls, Sibling Schoolgirls, and I directed that for them. And it's pretty good. It was their early days, so they played 2 Notting Hill girlies.
Yeah.
You know, easier to take stuff from real life. But they lampooned it quite well.
Nice.
Have a look.
Fantastic. And are there any other projects that you're currently working on that you'd like to plug or mention?
No, just I heavily plugged
Johnny Vegas.
Dial M for Middlesbrough. And I've plugged the potential horror film for next year.
Has that got a title yet?
Year.
Has that got a title yet, the comedy horror?
Xbox.
Okay.
Probably won't be able to use that, as in EX, as opposed to an X.
And I just wondered, related to earlier, when you're at Kingston College, did your friend who was a part-time drug dealer go on to become a full-time drug dealer?
No, he went on, get this, he went on to become a policeman.
Wow, okay.
Is he the policeman that's a fan of Bottom?
Yeah.
Probably.
He is. Well, one of them, yeah. No, I know he is, yeah. But there was a different policeman. This policeman was the one who nearly arrested me.
Does he take credit? Does he know how much influence he's had on the comedy industry?
Not really, but I'll give him a mention in my memoir.
Yeah.
So this isn't a question. This is just, as I wonder if you've heard this before, any other stupid children like me. When I was 9 years old, first time watching Bottom, the end credits where Eddie waves his hands and then your name comes up, Ed Bye. I thought it was like saying goodbye mixed with Eddie, Ed Bye. Has anyone ever thought that before? Or is it just me being
how
weirdo?
People, sort of analyse Shakespeare and say this is definitely because there's the reality of that was he kicks Rik in the bollocks, he flies out of the screen and he takes a bow, basically.
He does jazz hands.
Jazz hands. Yeah. And any egotistical director like me would clearly take that opportunity to slap their name across it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a short name, so it fits all right. Sure. It's quite cheap.
Was there ever a choice to have Rik and Ade in any other clothes other than the classic outfits that they had?
No, and funny enough, it was quite tricky. There's quite a few things in Bottom that we wanted to keep. There's a table with a sort of Venetian picture on it made out of bent wire, and we've had that in outside rehearsals. Outside rehearsal, we go one table, so that you could rehearse around it, not the real thing. We liked it so much we took it from rehearsal rooms, but it was the only one.
Right.
Nobody could find another. And it's the same thing with the clothes. We'd had to repair Eddie's shoes because you just couldn't find a pair of shoes like that anymore. And the suits and the clothes, we had to carefully look after them. And there was there was never any intention to wear anything different to what they did. I think it worked so well.
Of course, the set was dismantled entirely between Series 2 and Series 3.
Absolutely. We had to rebuild it,
Did you have any hand in that, or was that no longer your concern?
I tended to walk onto the set and go, more shit. Make it more disgusting. Make it, and no, the set design is a sort of collusion between the designer and the director because I've got to shoot it, so I need the actors to be able to move around. I need to get the cameras to shoot it. And good designers know that, but you still have that kind of discussion.
Yeah.
I like long, deep shots. Quite often there's an outtake of Rik having to pick up a telephone, he's in the wrong place. But I wanted him right close to the camera and Eddie way back and you see the whole flat. I love deep shots like that.
Yeah.
Do you think now, just thinking about the gas episode, Rik runs towards the kitchen and then gets a gas explosion in the face, and he's in the same shot as it, and the young ones featured Rik having the cooker explode next to him. Would the BBC allow that now, or was that something of its time, do you think?
I think they would allow it now, but it would have to be much more controlled.
Right.
And certainly any explosions in front of an audience is out. You
Yeah.
can't have a naked flame in front of an audience. No.
Really?
Yeah. The short answer to your question is no.
Okay.
It probably wouldn't. An explosion that vicious,
Yeah.
I'd have had to have shot. These days, I'd have to shoot separately and then put him in separately and get him to react and then mix the two together,
Yeah.
which would be perfectly good. But there's something really organic about that explosion.
There's something for the performer as well to feel the heat on their face, and yeah.
Yeah, the searing pain. Yeah.
To actually suffer third-degree burns.
Yeah.
And are there any fluffs that you remember fondly, like actually filming it, or were you frustrated when they kept corpsing?
Whenever they made a mistake, it was fine by me. It's always funny, but they very rarely did. And the one that I remember most, because Rik very, very rarely got his lines wrong. I mean, really, just very few times. And if he did, it was something else that had happened, like the camera had crashed into something, or something had gone wrong. But there was an episode where he has to drink hedgehog's urine,
Yeah.
and there's a moment where he thinks that a pubic hair has got stuck in his teeth, and he drinks the thing. And then he just corpsed. It's the only time I've ever seen him corpse. And as he corpsed, he banged I think he was in a wheelchair with a broken leg at the time. He banged the wheelchair going, bugger, bugger. He was really annoyed that he corpsed.
Got to him.
Yeah.
I think that was included in the bottom fluff video, wasn't it?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Is there? Is it?
Yeah.
All right.
Do you have an absolute favourite episode overall?
Funnily enough, I think it's the first one, Bottom Smells, the first transmitted one, because it really was huge sense of relief that we'd done this and got it right, and it was funny. And then everything after that was that was like this big beacon and starting point. So we go, if we can make it as good as that, then it will be great. And the one, I guess the slightly unusual one was Wimbledon Common. I particularly like the fights and the ridiculous dart blowing sequences and things like that.
The trio of dart hits, very good.
Yeah.
And of course, that episode was delayed for transmission.
Yes, because of Wimbledon Common murders, not far from where we are. In fact, one of you could be a murderer.
I think all three of us, right?
Yeah. A bunch of murderers. The only other thing I wanted to say was this: if you've got time, is the story of the titles. So the opening titles, I didn't have an idea what we were going to do. Rik and Ade had just written titles, so I needed to sort of think what we were going to do, and I couldn't think. I just wanted something to be sort of urban and squalid, but also funny. So I was driving around Hammersmith Broadway, and I saw that they were building what is now Hammersmith Broadway. The only indication they gave to what it was going to look like was one window, which was just miles up in the air. And I looked at it and I thought, that is ridiculous. That is hilarious. So I thought that would be funny. I hadn't really thought beyond that. So I got Rik and Ade out and we looked at, they went out the windows, and I was trying to do magnificent pull-outs on a 35mm camera and trying to time it so there were tubes going past and stuff like that. Well, we managed to get the shot, and I said, that's great, we got a shot. And then we got down, and Ade he said, is that going to be enough, just that shot? And I went, dunno. He said, let's cover just in case. So it was his idea to go across the road, literally across the road, to a bench. And he said, we'll do something. I said, okay. So I set the camera up across the road. He said, we'll think of something, just shoot. I went, okay. So we shot. And they did what you see from the opening titles. And the bizarre bit was that when the bus goes past and Rik has disappeared, that was for real. I had no idea he was going to do that. So he saw the bus and ran when the bus came past and just disappeared. It wasn't a special effect. There was no tricks. He just did it.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And I have to give them full credit for that because that was the two of them. I did the silly shot with the windows, but they came up with that, and I had no idea what they were going to do, and they did it in one take.
That's an iconic. That's an iconic.
Have you been to
scene.
the Rik bench at all?
No, I haven't been to the Rik bench yet. I passed it, but I've never found anywhere to park. But
No,
I will. I want to go and sit on it and take a selfie.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure on our parts.
Well,
Thank you
great.
very
It was
much.
nice
And
to talk to you.
congratulations, you've got the job.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My agent's number is one.
So guys, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Bottom. Please give us a follow. You can also email in with any questions or thoughts at 11mafekinparade@gmail.com. And if you want to email Ed By directly, what's your contact details?
My agent.
Well, thanks very much again, Ed, and we won't ever see you again probably, but it's been an absolute
Why?
pleasure.
What have I done wrong?
Now let's go for a pint. Come on.
All right.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for
Right.
listening, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Goodbye.
Ed, bye.
It's funny because it's a joke on my name.